Ladies and gentlemen, there are moments in our lives when the weight of the world feels unbearable, when the very essence of who we are seems to fray and unravel. You may not always voice it aloud, but deep within you feel tired, not just physically, but in ways that words cannot easily capture. It is a fatigue that sinks deeper into the heart and mind, a weariness that clings to the spirit and robs us of our strength. But I ask you, do you ever consider that perhaps this weariness is not a sign of failure or abandonment? That perhaps it is a sign that you are fully human. In a world that demands constant motion, constant perfection, we often find ourselves exhausted by the relentless pursuit of success, approval, and meaning. Yet, in these moments of fatigue, something profoundly important happens. We are reminded of our limits, our dependence, and the deep yearning of our hearts for something more than what this world can provide. God knows you are tired. He understands the weight you carry, whether in the struggles of daily life, the quiet heartbreaks, or the aching question of purpose that sometimes seems to echo in the silence of your soul. And here is the truth: He hears your heart. Not just your words, not just your external struggles, but the unspoken cry of your spirit, the weariness that drapes over you like a heavy cloak. It may feel at times that no one is listening, that your tears fall unnoticed and your prayers go unanswered. But in those quiet moments when you feel most alone, you are not unheard. The Creator of the universe, who knows the number of hairs on your head, hears the whispers of your soul. In a world that celebrates strength and self-sufficiency, God offers something far more radical. He offers to be the strength when you are weak, the peace when you are restless, the hope when you feel lost. This is not a promise that the struggle will cease immediately, or that the path will be free from hardship. No, God does not remove the weight, but He walks beside you, lifting you when you cannot carry it alone. You see, weariness in its deepest form is not something to be ashamed of. It is, in fact, a part of the divine rhythm of life. Just as night follows day, so too does our fatigue come before our renewal. But it is in that weariness that we can find God's greatest strength, for His power is made perfect in our weakness. When we are tired, we are reminded that we do not walk this journey alone. God hears the deepest cries of your heart. He knows your sorrow, your struggles, and your despair. And though the world may not always listen, God is always there, not merely to listen, but to heal, to restore, and to renew. So let us not mistake weariness for defeat. Let us not confuse our human frailty with failure. In our exhaustion, God is present. In our weakness, He is strong. And in the stillness of our hearts, His grace is sufficient to carry us through. I urge you, in your moments of fatigue, to rest in this truth: God knows your weariness, and He hears the cry of your heart. Let that truth be the light that guides you through your darkest hours. For in Him we find not just relief from our burdens, but the hope of renewed strength for the journey ahead. Weariness is one of the most universal human experiences. It is a fatigue that goes beyond the body and into the heart, mind, and soul. When we speak of weariness, we are not merely referring to the physical exhaustion that follows a long day's work or the tiredness that comes after an arduous journey. No, weariness often reaches into deeper places, where it affects our spirits and emotions, leaving us not only physically drained, but also spiritually depleted. This type of weariness is not something that can always be remedied by rest or a change of scenery. It is a weariness of the heart, a tiredness that lingers long after the body has had its rest, a deep and heavy burden that follows us even in moments of stillness. It is important to understand that weariness is not a sign of weakness. Society often encourages the idea that weariness equals failure or incompetence. We are taught to be strong, to push through, to keep going, no matter how tired we may feel. And yet there comes a point when the soul simply cannot continue at the pace it has been set. It may be from the constant pressure of expectations, either our own or those imposed upon us by others. It may arise from the ceaseless demands of the world, from the never-ending to-do lists, the expectations of success, or the pursuit of goals that seem to perpetually stretch just out of reach. All these pressures weigh down on us and leave us drained. But weariness is not a sign of failure. It is an invitation to recognize our humanity, our limits, and our need for something beyond ourselves. When we are weary, we are reminded that we are not invincible, that we do not have infinite strength. There is a quiet, humbling truth in weariness. It is a sign that we are human, not machines. It is a moment when we encounter our own fragility, and in that recognition, we learn to embrace our dependence on something greater than ourselves. What makes weariness particularly difficult is that it often feels like an overwhelming weight that is impossible to shake off. When we are physically tired, we may find that rest brings us relief. But the weariness of the heart and soul does not simply disappear when we lie down to sleep. It lingers in the background, and in some ways it becomes part of who we are. We may try to ignore it, push it aside, or fill it with distractions. But these efforts often only temporarily mask the deeper sense of exhaustion. We begin to feel the weight of the world, not just in our bodies, but in our minds as well. The constant chatter of thoughts, the worries about the future, the burdens of regret from the past, all contribute to the deep weariness of the spirit. Perhaps one of the most challenging aspects of weariness is that it often leads to a sense of isolation. When we are tired in this way, we may feel as though no one truly understands the weight we carry. Our struggles become invisible to others, and we may fear that no one sees how much we are suffering. In these moments, we are prone to retreat inwardly, to isolate ourselves from the world, believing that our burdens are too great to share. But the truth is that we are not alone in our weariness. It is part of the shared human experience. Everyone, at some point, feels the weight of exhaustion, not just physical but emotional and spiritual. Despite how overwhelming weariness can feel, there is also a profound beauty in it. It is in our tiredness that we are most vulnerable, most open to grace, and most aware of our need for renewal. Weariness, in its deepest sense, can be a reminder that we are finite beings, constantly in need of rest, of restoration, and of hope. When we reach the end of our own strength, we are often led to seek help from outside ourselves. It is at these moments that we may find solace in faith, in community, and in the understanding that we are not meant to carry our burdens alone. Weariness may lead us to a place where we are more willing to listen, to receive, and to accept the grace that is offered to us, even when we feel undeserving. Ultimately, weariness teaches us the value of rest, not just the rest that comes from sleep, but the deeper rest that comes from acknowledging our limitations and our need for connection. It teaches us humility and the importance of self-care, and it opens the door for healing and renewal, both for our bodies and our spirits. In understanding our weariness, we also begin to understand our need for one another and the importance of allowing ourselves to be vulnerable in the face of life's struggles. Weariness, though painful, is a profound teacher, guiding us toward deeper wisdom and greater empathy for others. The nature of God's compassion is one of the most profound and comforting aspects of His character. It is not a compassion that is detached or abstract, but a compassion that is deeply intertwined with the human experience. God's compassion is not passive or distant. It is active, personal, and intimately involved in the lives of those who suffer. Throughout the Scriptures, we see God's compassion depicted as a tender care for the brokenhearted, a deep understanding of human pain, and a willingness to enter into the suffering of His people in order to heal and restore them. God's compassion is not conditional or dependent upon our own worthiness. It is a gift that is freely given, extending to all who are in need, regardless of their past or present circumstances. One of the most striking elements of God's compassion is that it is never withdrawn, even in the face of our failures or shortcomings. Human compassion is often contingent upon behavior, reputation, or circumstances. People may show compassion when it is convenient, or when they deem it appropriate, but God's compassion is not bound by such limitations. His love for us is unconditional. Even when we are at our lowest, even when we feel undeserving, God's compassion remains steadfast. His compassion is not based on merit but on His nature, which is defined by mercy, grace, and love. This means that no matter how far we may feel from God, no matter how deep our struggles, His compassion remains a constant force in our lives. God's compassion is also unique in that it is both all-knowing and all-sufficient. Unlike human compassion, which is limited by understanding, experience, and resources, God's compassion is infinite in both depth and scope. He knows our suffering in a way that no one else can. He knows not just the surface of our pain, but the intricate details of our hearts, the fears that hold us captive, and the wounds that have been hidden away for years. Because God knows us fully and completely, He is able to offer a compassion that is perfectly suited to our needs. There is nothing about our pain that escapes His attention. There is no hurt too small or too great for His care. His compassion is not a mere sympathy. It is an understanding that transcends our ability to express our emotions or articulate our deepest wounds. It is a compassion that reaches into the depths of our being and touches us where we need it most. Another remarkable aspect of God's compassion is that it is not simply a passive feeling, but a dynamic force that leads to action. God does not just feel pity for those who suffer, He acts on their behalf. From the Old Testament to the New Testament, we see God's compassion manifesting in acts of deliverance, healing, and restoration. When the Israelites were in bondage in Egypt, God heard their cries and sent Moses to lead them to freedom. When Jesus walked the earth, He did not merely observe the suffering of humanity from a distance. He healed the sick, comforted the grieving, and raised the dead. In His compassion, God does not leave us to face our struggles alone. He enters into our suffering, meets us in our pain, and offers us a path toward healing and wholeness. This active compassion is seen most clearly in the life of Jesus, who, out of great love for humanity, took on our suffering and endured the cross to reconcile us to God. God's compassion also extends beyond the individual to the larger community. While God deeply cares for each person, His compassion is not limited to isolated acts of kindness, but encompasses His entire creation. He is concerned not only with individual well-being, but with the well-being of the world as a whole. His compassion moves Him to work toward the redemption of all creation, to restore what has been broken, and to bring healing to the whole of humanity. In this sense, God's compassion is holistic. It is concerned with the spiritual, emotional, and physical needs of His people, as well as the justice and peace that are necessary for a flourishing society. The compassion of God, therefore, is not just about personal comfort, but about a greater movement toward the healing of all things. Finally, the nature of God's compassion is transformative. It is not something that leaves us unchanged, but something that works within us to bring about renewal. When we experience the compassion of God, it changes us. It softens our hearts, deepens our empathy, and encourages us to extend the same compassion to others. God's compassion does not only heal us, it invites us to participate in His work of healing the world. As we receive His love and mercy, we are called to reflect that love to those around us, to show the same kindness, mercy, and understanding that we have received. In this way, God's compassion not only impacts our individual lives, but also has the power to transform the communities in which we live. In sum, the nature of God's compassion is boundless, transformative, and ever-present. It is a compassion that knows no limits, that does not depend on our actions or worthiness, and that leads to both healing and restoration. It is a compassion that calls us to open our hearts to others and to reflect the love and mercy that we ourselves have received. The heart is often described as the deepest part of who we are, a wellspring from which our actions, thoughts, and desires emerge. It is in the heart that our truest feelings reside, the unspoken longings, the silent fears, and the quiet hopes that shape our lives in ways we cannot always articulate. In a world that tends to prioritize outward appearances and external accomplishments, the depth of the heart often goes unnoticed or undervalued. Yet it is here, in the inner recesses of our being, that the most profound aspects of our humanity are revealed. The heart is not just the seat of emotions, but it is the core of our identity. It is where our most intimate thoughts and beliefs are formed, where our values are cultivated, and where we seek meaning and purpose. While the mind may calculate, reason, and judge, the heart feels deeply, loves passionately, and desires profoundly. The heart is the place where we are most vulnerable, where we experience both our greatest joys and our deepest sorrows. It is not simply a metaphor for our feelings, it is a reflection of the entirety of our inner selves, our core essence. Our hearts are shaped by the experiences we go through, the people we love, the challenges we face, the losses we endure, and the moments of grace we receive. Yet this depth of the heart is not always something we can easily access or understand. The heart is often clouded by the noise and distractions of the world around us. We live in a society that encourages outward success, that measures value by achievements, appearance, and material possessions. In such an environment, the heart's quiet, subtle voice can easily be drowned out. The pressure to conform to external standards can sometimes push us to neglect the deeper longings of the heart. We may bury our true desires, suppress our emotions, or hide our wounds because the world tells us that these things are either too messy or too vulnerable to show. Yet, in doing so, we often lose touch with the very essence of who we are. There is a sense in which the heart longs for connection, not only with others, but with something greater than itself. It craves a sense of purpose, a meaning that transcends the everyday struggles of life. It seeks understanding, healing, and belonging. When we are disconnected from our hearts, we may find ourselves feeling lost or directionless, unable to fully understand why we do the things we do or why we feel the way we feel. This disconnect can lead to a sense of emptiness or dissatisfaction that no external achievement or success can fill. It is in returning to the depth of our hearts that we begin to understand who we truly are and what we are truly meant to become. The depth of the heart also encompasses our ability to love, to give, and to forgive. Love is often seen as a central aspect of the human experience, and it is from the heart that love flows. Love is not merely an emotion, it is an intentional act, a choice that emanates from the heart's deepest desires. It is in loving others that we discover more about ourselves, about the capacity of our hearts to stretch beyond our own boundaries and care for someone else. Love is the bridge that connects us to others, and it is through love that we experience a sense of fulfillment and wholeness. However, love also requires vulnerability. To love is to open ourselves to the possibility of hurt, to expose our hearts to the risks of rejection and disappointment. But it is precisely in this vulnerability that the depth of the heart is most evident. The heart that loves is the heart that dares to be vulnerable, to take risks for the sake of connection and growth. At times, the heart can become wounded or hardened as a result of life's trials or emotional pain. When we experience hurt or betrayal, the heart may retreat, becoming closed off or cynical. We may build walls around it, determined not to be hurt again. Yet this kind of self-protection can often lead to an even greater emptiness. The heart is meant to be open, to give and receive love, to be honest and transparent. When we shut it off from others, we deny ourselves the very connection that we need to heal and grow. The heart needs both vulnerability and protection, not in the sense of closing it off, but in guarding it from being overwhelmed by pain and allowing it to heal. The depth of the heart is about understanding its capacity to reflect the fullness of our humanity. It is the place where our hopes and dreams are born, where our pain is processed, and where our most authentic selves reside. To understand the depth of the heart is to recognize its power to shape the way we live, to guide us through the trials of life, and to show us the way toward true meaning and fulfillment. It is a journey inward, one that requires courage and honesty, but it is also a journey that leads to the discovery of our true selves and our deepest capacity for love, joy, and grace. The heart is the truest mirror of our existence, and it is only when we engage with its depth that we can truly live as our most authentic and whole selves. God's knowledge of us is a concept that transcends the limits of human understanding. We often think of knowledge in terms of what we can see, hear, and touch, facts we can gather through our experiences, senses, or intellect. But God's knowledge is not constrained by these limitations. It is a knowledge that goes far beyond the surface, into the very depths of who we are. It is not just knowledge of our actions and thoughts, but a profound, intimate understanding of our hearts, our motivations, and our struggles. It is a knowledge that reaches into every corner of our being, knowing us fully, without hesitation or distance. From the moment we are conceived, God knows us. He knows our thoughts before we think them, our desires before we voice them, and our dreams before we chase them. His knowledge is not just a passive awareness, it is an active, ongoing presence in our lives. There is nothing about us that is hidden from Him. This can be a deeply comforting thought for some, and a deeply challenging one for others. We may feel that there are parts of ourselves, our fears, our weaknesses, our deepest regrets that we must keep hidden from others, even from ourselves. But God knows these things. He sees us not only as we appear on the outside, but He understands the inner workings of our hearts, even the parts we ourselves struggle to comprehend. God's knowledge of us is not bound by time. While our understanding of the world is shaped by the limitations of past, present, and future, God exists outside of time. He knows our past with perfect clarity, our present with unwavering accuracy, and our future with complete certainty. There is no moment in our lives that escapes His gaze. Our memories, our experiences, our moments of joy and sorrow, they are all fully known to Him. He is not surprised by our choices or overwhelmed by the complexities of our lives. Even before we make a decision, God knows the paths we will take and the outcomes that will follow. His knowledge is not determined by our actions, but is a reflection of His perfect understanding of all things. At times we may feel that our lives are beyond comprehension, that the pain and challenges we face are so complex that no one could truly understand them. But God understands us completely. In our moments of confusion and doubt, He sees the bigger picture. He knows the reasons behind our pain, even when we cannot articulate them. He knows our struggles, not just as an observer, but with a deep, compassionate understanding. He knows the things we carry that weigh us down, the fears that paralyze us, and the hopes that sustain us. His knowledge of us is rooted in love, not in judgment. His understanding is always coupled with grace and mercy. There is a profound comfort in knowing that God knows us fully, and yet still loves us. In a world where we often hide parts of ourselves, whether out of shame, fear, or uncertainty, it can be overwhelming to realize that there is nothing we can conceal from God. But this is not a knowledge that condemns us. It is a knowledge that invites us into deeper intimacy with Him. God's knowledge of us is not about keeping track of our failures or shortcomings. It is about seeing us through the lens of His love and grace. He knows the potential we have, the person we are becoming, and the journey we are on. Even when we falter, He sees the whole of us, not just the moments of failure, but the growth that comes from them. God's knowledge of us also means that He is perfectly equipped to guide us. He knows exactly what we need, when we need it, and how we will respond. Our desires, longings, and decisions are all known to Him, and He is intimately involved in the process of shaping our lives. His wisdom is never lacking, and His guidance is always perfect. In times of confusion, when we feel lost or uncertain, we can trust that God's knowledge of us will lead us to the right path, even when we cannot see it ourselves. He knows the way forward, even when we are unsure. This divine knowledge is not passive. It is a relational knowledge. It is not just about God observing us from a distance, but about God being with us in every moment, knowing us deeply and personally. It invites us into a relationship where we can be fully known and fully loved, where we don't have to hide or pretend, but can approach Him with honesty and vulnerability. This is a gift one that allows us to rest in the security of knowing that we are seen, heard, and loved by the Creator of the universe. Even when others may not understand us, even when we struggle to understand ourselves, God's knowledge of us remains a constant, unwavering truth. In the end, God's knowledge of us is not just about knowing facts, it is about knowing us in the most profound and personal way possible. It is a knowledge that brings us comfort, healing, and hope. It reassures us that we are never alone in our struggles, and that our lives are not merely random events, but part of a larger divine story that God understands completely. His knowledge of us is perfect, boundless, and full of love, and it is a source of great peace for those who rest in it. The struggle of silence is a profound and often misunderstood experience. In a world that is filled with noise, both literal and metaphorical silence can become a source of discomfort and even fear. It is easy to imagine silence as merely the absence of sound, but it is much more than that. Silence can be a place where unresolved emotions, unspoken words, and hidden fears surface. It can expose the depths of our inner world, making us confront the parts of ourselves that we would rather avoid. In this way, silence becomes a struggle, for it forces us to confront our thoughts and feelings without the distractions we often rely on to numb our pain or fill the emptiness. In moments of silence, we are left alone with our thoughts. For some, this means being forced to reckon with the complexities of life, the unresolved issues, the lingering doubts, the feelings of inadequacy. The noise of the world often drowns these thoughts, allowing us to carry on without fully facing them. But when silence settles, it brings all these buried emotions to the surface, and suddenly we are left with a flood of thoughts and reflections that can be overwhelming. The struggle, then, is not just about the silence itself, but about the confrontation with all that it reveals. In these quiet moments, we may realize how much we've been avoiding, how many things we've pushed aside in favor of distractions. The silence compels us to acknowledge the parts of our lives that need attention, whether it's the pain we've ignored or the desires we've suppressed. Thanks for watching.